Welcome, friends, to this episode of the Sync Your Life podcast. Today, I'm joined by my new friend, Ben Spangl. We're going to be talking today all about things related to mindset and manifestation. We've got some really, he's sitting right now on video. I know you can't see this because you're listening audibly, maybe unless you're watching on YouTube, but he's got all of my favorite books behind him. So I don't have my bookshelf positioned directly behind me, but I have almost all of the same books. So I think we're going to totally nerd out today on the topic of just personal growth, mindset, all the things. So without further ado, I will simply just welcome you to the show, Ben, and have you introduce yourself to my guests.
Hey, thanks so much, Jenny. I'm really excited to be together with you and your audience, and I'm looking forward to today's chat for sure. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I would love for you to just share a little bit about who you are and what led you to doing what you're doing.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta, so I'm a Canadian up north here. I spent the early part of my life growing up. My mom and dad always struggled with money, finances, as many people did. Led to a lot of fighting, ultimately led to them getting divorced later on too, amongst other things as well too. And so early in my life, I had made this decision that I said, that's not going to be me. And I wanted to make money. I wanted to have money. I wanted to make money. I hated the answers of we can't afford it, all that. So I remember getting my first job when I was 15, and I pretty much saved every penny I made. And I saved up, $4,000 or $5,000. And that's a fair bit when you're 15, 16, right? But then this new computer came out for this computer game, and I needed a better computer, and I literally spent all my money. So I went from having it to not having any. And that was my first lesson. I didn't realize at the time, but my first lesson, the power of programming, the power of, even though I didn't want to be like mom and dad, I was heading down that path. Mm-hmm. And then, I went to college for a semester, hated it, dropped out, got into bridge construction, and started making, pretty good money. I was clearing $6,000 a month when I was 18 years old. But the same thing happened. I'd gone to a place where now I had more money than ever, and then yet it was gone all the time. Fast forward a few years later, I got out of that, got into a different construction role, but I ended up on a job site where I met someone and got an opportunity to start in financial services. And in financial services, I began that career in that business. I got access to some great mentors. They got me into personal growth, personal development, which led to reading the very first book I ever read, Think and Grow Rich. And then that led to many, many more. And over the next 3 years, I became obsessed with learning how, I guess, our mind works, and this idea of being able to turn a thought into reality, the whole process of manifestation, everything. And I was obsessed with learning it, but I wasn't experiencing it. I wasn't creating good results. Matter of fact, it was getting worse in my life. I was, still struggling. So then fast forward a little bit further. It's the end of these 3 years. It's November 2010. I'm at my very first personal development seminar. It was called the Millionaire Mind Intensive. I'm not sure if it's still available, but it's through Harv Eker. And that seminar changed my life for a couple of reasons. Number one, I met my wife at that seminar, so it changed our life in a big way, right? Of course, would never family anything without that. But I really learned through experiential learning the power of programming. Intellectually, I had read about this stuff, but then I learned how to actually change my mind and how to rewrite my programming. And what happened next was incredible. Over the next 12 months, things dramatically changed. My income doubled within 3 years. I had quadrupled my income from that point. And our whole life just really started to change in such a powerful way. So I kept studying, I kept going to more seminars, kept reading, kept doing all this stuff. And then, fast forward, that was 2010. Now here we are, 2023. Our life had changed so much in our business, and we'd done all this stuff internally, helping our sales team and everything with this. But I knew one day I wanted to help beyond just our business and wanted to bring this to the world. So that's how I got started doing this. And that's what led me into what I do now.
Yeah. If you're like me, it's like one book leads to another one, and then the seminar, and then, it's very similar. My first book I ever read in the personal growth space was The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson.
Yeah,
and then
great book.
The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to personal growth through network marketing. My corporate employer looked at me like I was crazy when I asked for personal growth. I thought it was, at that time, I've shared this on the podcast before, but in my 20s, I thought my company, like the company that I worked for, would really be the one to facilitate my skill set development and my growth, until I finally realized I was introduced to network marketing, and network marketing introduced me to the idea that really growth is on my own terms. Like I can take this into my own hands. And so Those were my first two books as well. And I remember taking the Slight Edge on a flight to Florida and reading it cover to cover. And just, that was the moment. It was like, I got off that airplane a different person. I got on that airplane and I got off the airplane 2 hours later, and I was like a changed person from just that one book. And that led to the same thing you said, like this obsession and almost addiction to personal growth. But the other thing that I've shared here on the podcast before too is you can be listening to all the things and reading all the things, but then applying them and really taking them into your life is a whole other level, right? And so
for sure it is.
Awareness and mindset are so key, but then application, of course, is where the magic happens. So you mentioned something in your story about just the power of programming. And, you know, it's so true, right? We are so, I mean, I know Tony Robbins talks about like how much our childhood impacts who we become. And I see this in our own families. We were just talking about this the other day. My husband and I were talking about when you grow up with like a scarcity mindset, right? It totally impacts your beliefs around money or around material things. I'd love for you to touch more on that before we dive into how to change it. Like, you know, let's talk about the power of programming.
That sounds awesome. If you haven't read The Slight Edge, for everybody listening, you got to get it. It's so good. Such a good read. The power program is like this. So, you know, we have a mind, as everyone knows, and our mind is amazing. I mean, we're the byproduct of that, right? You know, if you think about everything that happens in your life, at least that comes from you, it happens at some way, shape, or point through your mind. I mean, how do thoughts happen? We know that. Feelings, I mean, you know, all of it's tied together. And ultimately, even what you do, it happens through your body, but your mind, of course, controls your body. So everything happens in the mind. But inside the mind, we know we've got the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And, you know, by the time you're 35, about 95% of your life and who you are is subconscious, and only about 5% is conscious. So the idea of awareness being that I'm consciously aware, but it's such a small level in our life. And from the ages of 0 to 7 is when the majority of this subconscious mind, it's like this giant supercomputer. And from the ages of 0 to 7 is primarily where it's been programmed. And the idea of the programming being if I program a computer with certain code, all it can do is that. And that's a lot like our life. And that's a lot like this great subconscious mind. So if you grew up, you know, money's easy because it's easy to measure, but if you grew up like I did in a household of struggle, very much your programming could be to struggle. And then so here you are, you're 25, 35, 45, 55, 65. And if we haven't worked on rewriting the programming, we could have years of work experience, years of everything, and we're still struggling financially. Not because you're not capable, not because the resources aren't available, not because the opportunity, no, it's not any of that. It's because that's how you're subconsciously programmed. And if 95% of the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you act is stored in this subconscious mind, that means you're not aware that you're thinking, feeling, acting in those ways. You're unconscious in it. It's happening on autopilot. Same thing when it comes to weight and health. Same thing when it comes to relationships. Every area of our life, we have a stored set of programs in this great subconscious mind. And when we don't recognize this and we're not aware of it, we just become frustrated because we do know what to do. There's not very many people thinking, you know, if I wanted to make more money, how would I do that? I mean, they could join a network marketing company. They could start a side hustle. I mean, there's a million things you could do nowadays that can make more money. How do I get in better shape? Nobody's wondering, how do I get in better shape? We do know how, right? And if you don't know how, the information is readily available. All you have to do is a quick Google search and you can find out lots of answers. So it's not about knowing how, but it's about actually doing what we know. The better question is, why don't we do what we know? And that comes back to how we were programmed. And these programs are very strong and they run our lives. The great news is you've been programmed to be a certain way, but you can completely reprogram your mind to become somebody entirely different.
Yeah, so good. So good. So the only, you know, tangible next question would be, what's the first step in rewiring our programming? What's the first step in rewriting that story for ourselves?
Yeah, I love the way you said that, the story. But I think the first step, number one, is just to clarify, what is it that you actually want? What does he actually want? Because that idea of the story, it really is. I mean, this programming is just a story. If you say money is always a struggle, that's a story. It's hard to keep the weight off. That's a story. And, these stories become these beliefs, right? They became beliefs over a long period of time. But as you keep telling the story, you keep reinforcing it. Because you keep telling the same story, you keep recreating the same experiences or the same conditions anyways, if you will. So the first step is to clarify, okay, well, that I don't want that anymore, but what do I actually want? What's the new story you would love to be telling in your life? And where people struggle with this is two things. Number one, we're so habitual, again, a program, but we're so habitual at focusing on what we don't want and continuing to beat the drum of the things that we don't want, continuing to tell the story of how it's not fair and it's this, it's that, and money's tough to come by and all this stuff. And because we keep doing it, we keep recreating it. So number one, clarify, what do you actually want? When you spend time focusing on what you want rather than what you don't want. And then even a second part to that, though, is once we start to clarify that, is it's now time to start focusing more on seeing that. And as we start to spend a little bit of time in our imagination, we start to spend a little bit of time in visualization. I mean, you can use meditation, you can use all these different tools, scripting, writing. There's so many different tools we can use. But to sum it all up, figure out what you want and start focusing in that direction. It's simple advice. It's simple to say, but like you said, to apply it is different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's interesting because I shared this story recently on the podcast about my daughter, my 6-year-old, who, when we had her parent teacher conference, the teachers told us that she seems to really be a perfectionist. Sometimes she'll wait or hesitate to initiate something or to start because she wants to make sure she's doing it the right way. And a book that they recommended for her is called I Can't Do That Yet. And I've already shared the story on the podcast, so I won't go into the details, but basically, it's so simple when it comes to kids. Like, I feel like sometimes, we can relate this to our children so much easier than we can relate it to ourselves. But for her, for her to constantly say the phrase, I can't do that, right? She's writing that programming for herself. And so 100%. As a parent, right, how simple is it for me to say, yet? Every time she says, I can't do that, how simple is it for me to say, no, you just can't do that yet? So I'm helping to like rewrite her programming. So that when that comes up in her brain, she now knows, oh, right, I just can't do it yet, right? I need more time or I need more practice. It can be, I really think sometimes we overcomplicate things. I say things often about, what if things were really simple, right? Like what if you have no energy is because of your lifestyle? What if it's because of your lack of sleep or your lack of nutrition? Same thing goes for our mindset, right? Like, as silly as some people might say, like, oh, affirmations are silly, right? Like they I'm not going to do that, right? I've heard people say that before, but it's like, it doesn't have to be affirmations. It can just be like you addressing the things that you're saying to yourself, like understanding what your self-talk is now and how you can really add on that word yet, or how you can change it and shift it so that you're thinking in a different way. I like that you mentioned clarity. Yeah. And that was probably one of my biggest, it's a chapter that I reference often from High Performance Habits by Brendon Burchard. Is the chapter on clarity, because I think for me, what you said really resonated about, we can stay stuck in the pattern of struggle of, and I always equate that to being, we want to stay in our safe zone. So even though we're not growing or we're not doing things to move us in the right direction, it's comfortable to stay stuck, but yet we complain about being stuck. Right. So I'd love to talk more on like, how can people gain more clarity around what's holding them back so that they can create that awareness of, okay, like now I'm done talking about it. Now it's time to to do something about it. Yeah. Great question. That book, I love that book too. He gave me, I remember reading it where I was, everything. I'm sitting in our TV room, and the couch that we have, it's not my favorite couch. We have more comfortable couches, but I'm sitting on this couch and I'm reading this book and I'm reading that chapter on clarity. And I'd been studying this stuff for a long time, but I love the way he put it is high performers are constantly seeking clarity. And the idea behind that, first and foremost, is that you're never going to get picture perfect clarity because there's always another level. So it's not like you get it once and, I got it. I don't have to work on this anymore. Right? It's a never ending process of seeking greater and greater clarity, because when I can see more clearly on one thing, that allows me now to see a whole new other level of whatever it may be. So yeah, the idea of clarity being this is that ultimately when we're looking at, if you pick an area of where you're struggling, any area, the reason why you're struggling in that area
is a combination of I shouldn't say a combination of these three things. Ultimately, the way you're thinking about it, the way you're feeling about it, and then what you're actually doing about it. Now, some people say, well, hey, I just can't control that. It just is what it is. And our mind runs. I mean, the chatter in our mind is endless, right? It does happen. That's true. But you do have control over your thoughts. I'm not saying you're going to control every thought that comes by, but you always have the ability to think a new thought. To be able to think is one of the greatest things that we've ever been given. As far as we know, we're the only species on the planet that can actually consciously think. So I could decide to think a new thought. So you pick the area you're struggling in, whatever, relationships, health, finance, doesn't matter, career. You pick the area and you can write down, okay, what are some of the thoughts that I've been thinking that have been holding me back? And then you become aware of them. And as you write down these thoughts, the act of writing them creates greater awareness. So now the next time that your mind starts to run that thought, you can interrupt it. And my favorite pattern interrupt is just super simple. The word cancel. As soon as a thought comes in that I don't want, I do my best to say cancel and then replace it. So what am I thinking in that area? The second thing would be, how am I feeling about that area? And you might write down currently how you're feeling, right? And it might be you're feeling guilty about it. It might be you're feeling angry about it. It might be you're feeling frustrated with it, but there's some kind of negative or low level emotion that you've been feeling in this area of struggle, right? And again, why are we doing this? Awareness. And then the third part is we look at your behavior, your actions. What are the behaviors and actions that you've been taking, you've been doing that have been continuing to recreate that, right? And then we're going to write those down too. So all these things are about awareness, so we can become aware, we can catch them and do our best. The greater awareness we have, the better choices we can make. So now we can choose a new thought, we can choose a new way of feeling, we can choose a new way of acting. But then the second part to the exercise, though, is we don't stop there. So that helps you build some awareness of what I'm thinking, feeling, and doing that's leading to these results in that area. And then again, what do I want? And we're now going to switch. What would I want to think about that? And then we're going to write down the thoughts that we would want to think. How would I want to feel about that? So, in money, as an example, you might think, man, money's hard to come by, or it's just a struggle, or things are tight, or even right now, I mean, we're seeing super high interest rates, crazy inflation. So a lot of people are feeling pinched today, right? A lot of people are. And so it's so easy for us to look at the outside world and allow the outside world to determine how we think, feel, and act. Just say, man, it's a crazy time right now. We're heading into a recession and it's scary and interest rates are high and they shouldn't have done that. And you got this whole story. Well, these are all thoughts that are not serving. So then what do I want to think? I want to think money's abundant. I want to think no matter what's going on in the economy, I can have a booming business, a booming career. And we're writing these down, right? It can flow to me easily and effortlessly, right? Whatever it may be. Well, these are new thoughts we want to start thinking. How do I want to feel about money? Maybe right now you feel squeezed, you feel tight, some people feel shame and guilt around money. I mean, there's so many mixed emotions because of how we were brought up about money. Most of us have very limiting beliefs around money. But the way you may want to feel is, I want to feel free. I want to feel abundant. I want to feel joy. And when we practice this, you do know what those feelings feel like. It's not like you've never felt them. But usually the way we're living our life is we allow just our life to unfold and then feel in a reaction to whatever's happening. So most people are living at these low level feelings, once in a while feeling some joy, once in a while feeling some abundance, but you can practice feeling an emotion. If you wanted to, you could feel grateful right now. And the third thing is just what kind of new actions do I want to start taking? And when we start to align these new thoughts, these new feelings, these new actions, and we practice them and we repeat them, it doesn't happen in a day, in 2 days, and not necessarily overnight, but over time, if you think, feel, and behave in new ways, you become a whole new you. And guess what? The law of life says you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. So if you become a new you, you must attract new results.
Yeah.
It must happen.
Yeah. I love what you just said about like reaction. Like, I just feel like 99% of people are living in a reactive state. Like they're reacting to the world around them. There's, and I mean, myself included, I know one of the most impactful books for me has been a book by John Maxwell called Intentional Living. And even just like setting aside time, when I talk to my health coaches, I'll talk about like planning your week, planning the like my planner that I created this year helps women cycle sync, but the whole top half of each day is dedicated to your priorities. Like what relationships are you focused on today? Like who needs you on your A game today, as Brendan Burchard says? Like, how do you want to feel today? Right. Like really addressing that, that feeling of how you want to feel and how you want to live your life, and that intention behind it, as opposed to just, these are all the things I have to do today. And I'm a victim of those things, right? Like I'm just going to react and respond throughout my day to what's happening to me, instead of like taking the initiative and being in control. One thing
100%.
one thing that my life coach says, she actually was just recently on the on the podcast, and was mentioning this in really briefly, but I'm going to expand on it here a moment, is just because I want my listeners to understand. I mean, this all sounds like it makes sense, but I want to make sure that they know, like, these are the things that you could be saying to yourself that aren't serving you. And so as you were talking, I wrote down a few of those that I just want to call attention to for the listeners, like things that I know I've struggled with, that my life coach has had to pause me in the middle of a session and be like, let's rewire that. Like that's the wrong, that's the wrong phraseology. The words that I wrote down were things like should, right? You shouldn't should all over yourself. Like
100%.
I should do this, right? I hear that all the time in health and fitness. Well, I should be better about my nutrition, or I should prioritize. No, like instead of should, let's commit. Like I'm committed to my exercise. I'm committed to my nutrition. Can't. Okay. I already mentioned that with my daughter. Let's make it, I can't do that yet. Trying to, this is a big one in personal growth. Well, I'm trying to work on that relationship with my husband, or I'm trying to work on whatever, or, I really think that's something I need to try to do. No, like, again, it comes back to like, are you trying? Are you thinking about it? Or are you committed to? And then also, this is one that Amy brought up, my life coach on that episode. She talked about the concept of, a lot of people get stuck in, well, I've never been able to, this idea that like, well, that's not something that I've ever been able to do well, or whatever. So therefore it's not something that I do. Right. And that's, I can even share a quick story about that for myself. I was labeled the girl all through high school that was really good at writing and communication and, language, and really bad at math. Like, and so I went down this avenue of, whatever I do in my career, I better stay away from math. I better stay away from logical. I need to be more on the creative. Right. And yes, that's true. Like my skill sets are in like reading and writing and all that kind of stuff. But it really deterred me from starting my own business. For the longest time, because I felt like, well, what if I fail? Like, what if I don't, I'm not the best with like financial numbers. I'm not the best with like understanding, that type of thing. And then you realize like, no, actually that was just a label that I put on myself. Like I wasn't able to do it at age 14, but I can surely learn it now, So I think these are all just different things that we can say to ourselves that I wanted to call attention to, because I think it's easy to be listening to this and to kind of let it go in one ear and out the other and be like, oh, that makes sense, but we still fall back into the trap of should and trying to, and I've never been able to.
That's
and
right.
It keeps us from moving forward. So
yeah, I think our language reveals a lot of our deepest beliefs, right? So when we get in these language patterns of should, try, can't, etc., these limiting thoughts, I mean, there's just a reflection of some kind of underlying belief of either I can't, or I'm not capable, or I'm not enough, or all these things that we all have struggled with and still do at different times in our life, myself included. Right. But again, those things, when you can start to shift them, you realize a belief is just a belief. It's not necessarily or inherently true or false. It just is. Right. It just is. That idea of I'm not good with numbers, so I can't be, it's just a thought. It's just a belief. And it was repeated enough times that it became a belief. That thought got repeated and now is a belief. Well, guess what? We can change it. And a lot of these beliefs we've never even questioned. And for most people throughout their lives, I mean, they spend a lot of time never examining, what do I actually think about that? Why do I think that? Where did that come from?
Right.
And then we realize sometimes if we'll do that, well, that was something when I was 14 years old that I made this decision. I was 14.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a C in pre-calc and it determined my future in business,
Right, exactly.
Right.
But it's because at that time in our life, we assign meaning to it that, oh, this means this. Well, I mean, nothing has any meaning other than the meaning we assign to it.
Right. Yeah. And I just happened to hear an interview on the radio with Bob Costas.
Okay.
It was a sports interview that I was listening to, and he was being asked about these people he'd interviewed and if he'd ever felt nervous, like in a setting of an interview, and who was it, if so. And he talked about he said he's never felt nervous in any interview. They've come naturally to him, but the only time he felt a little jitters was when he interviewed Paul McCartney. And he said he believes it was because Paul McCartney was such an influential had such an influential impact on him as a child.
Mm.
And he talked about how he believes that we have so much more, you just said it when you were talking, like we have so much more, I don't know, like we put more meaning onto things
For
as
sure.
children.
For
And so
sure.
he talked about like, here he was a grown man interviewing a grown man. And he's like, but
Yeah.
all these flashbacks of like childhood and how he really idolized him is what gave him the jitters. And I think that's very similar to what you're saying, you know, is like we attach meaning to things.
Yep.
And we don't stop to think like, why does that even have meaning? Like, why did I assign that meaning to it? That's so good.
That's
I
right.
want to make sure we address like, okay, so we've talked about how to really shift our mindset, like how to know like the language we're telling ourselves, and then sort of change that to you said the thoughts, the feelings, and the actions that we need to make the change. But one thing that you talk a lot about that I want to make sure we touch on is this idea of manifestation. And what that can really do for us as we sort of engage in a growth journey. So I'd love to talk about that.
One of my favorite subjects. You know, a lot's been talked about the law of attraction, creating your reality, manifestation. I mean, ultimately, what is it in my opinion, what's to manifest something? Manifestation is where something shows up in your experience, right? I mean, that you manifested that showed up, right? Now, we're doing this all the time. It's just most of the time we're not doing it deliberately, and we're not doing it with intention, that idea of intentional living. But to be able, really, when we teach this idea, I like to think of to manifest something is to be able to think, I've got this idea of something I want in my life, right? And I'm able to turn that. Right now, it's just an idea. It's just a thought. But then I can turn that it now shows up in my physical experience. So, you know, the law of attraction, The Secret did great work for teaching this too. This idea of that your thoughts are things, your thoughts are powerful. You attract what you think about, you bring about what you think about. All of this stuff is very true, that is the case. And, you know, it happens to us quite often in small things where these thoughts do become reality. I'm on the phone with a friend of mine yesterday, and, you know, we talk a lot about this stuff. He goes, hey, I wanted to share a quick manifestation story with this super small one, but he's driving his car and he goes, you know what? I should probably like to give my car a car wash. And he stops at this gas station to fill up. This guy comes up to him and says, hey, do you want a free car wash? And he goes, yeah, he just thought this, right? Do you want a free car wash? He goes, yeah. He said, well, I was just fixing our car wash here. He works at the station. I'm just fixing it. My van's too big to bring it through to make sure it works. Do you mind if can we bring yours through? I mean, that's a cool story, cool little manifest, you know, thought, reality, small example of it, right? But then there's the bigger things too of how these can unfold in our life. So I love this thing. I think it's awesome. I think that the more we can learn to create from thought, the more we can learn to create from, you know, our mind, the less of always having to just work your ass off for it. Can you work really hard and get what you want? Yes, you can. Right? Can you put in longer hours? Can you do 7 days a week? I mean, I suppose you could. I just found after a period of doing that, I didn't want to do that anymore. That wasn't how I wanted to live. And it doesn't mean, some people confuse when they get on this idea of creating your reality and manifesting, that I just sit at home and don't do anything. No, it doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. But it does mean, though, is that you can do it with a lot more ease. You can create it. And that's what I think my opinion, I feel part of my life's work is to help people understand, is that you are so much more powerful than you realize. We all are so much more powerful than we realize.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because when you were talking about the subconscious mind, and I was thinking about the fact that I heard this somewhere and I think about it often, you know, like when we start to choose a new car for ourselves and we're like, oh, I really like that, you know, Jeep Wrangler or that whatever, you know, we're Jeep people. So we see something and we're like, oh, Jeep came out with a new car. Like, I really like it. Right. All of a sudden you start to see that car all the time. You're like, oh, like I saw one there. You know, my husband and I are actually doing that right now, looking for another car. And we're seeing this car all the time. We're like, must be a sign, but really it's the car we like. Right. So your subconscious mind will start to see things. It's almost like a visualization tactic. You start to become more aware. So I feel like that's the same as like manifestation. Like you start to manifest what you're looking for, or what, you know, and then opportunities come, and then you notice those opportunities because you've manifested those.
100%. Yep.
100%.
Yeah. It's the combination of what you just explained, that reticular activating system in our brain that does exactly that what you want already exists. But if you're not thinking about it, if it's not in your awareness, then you're not going to see it. I mean, if you think about all the information that's coming at us in any given second, there has to be a filtering mechanism. Otherwise you'd go crazy
Mm-hmm.
to be able to interpret all the stimuli that's coming at us. So we block stuff out that's only, either necessary for our safety, important to us, or aligns with what we believe and what we value. I mean, these are things, right? So there's that part. So when I actually start to shift my focus towards what I want, I start to see more that was already there, a lot of it. But then the secondary part of it too, though, is that when I do start to think and shift more towards what I want and feel what it would be like to have what I want, I also start to attract new people, places, circumstances, conditions into my environment. So I get to see things that weren't there, but I'm attracting, you start thinking about this idea, and all of a sudden the next day you're having a conversation about that very thing with someone out of the blue. And it wasn't you that brought it up, but they brought it up to you. Well, you attracted that conversation. I made the other day, I was just thinking, I thought, you know what? I'm ready to grow my income to all new levels. And so I had this intention of what I wanted to take it to. And then within 4 days, I had 4 new clients that 3 of them had reached out to me.
Mm-hmm.
One I did, right? But 3 of them had reached out to me. Now, some people say, well, it's totally coincidence. Or, yeah, well, I guess in a way it was a coincidence, a synchronicity. Yes, but that's part of this manifestation process. This stuff starts to happen more and more and more often. The more you pay attention to it, the more you work with the tools, everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. I was thinking about Ed Milet's podcast episode that I listened to this week. It was just a really short episode, and it had such a profound impact on me, because something you said a minute ago about you believe that we have so much in us and that we should really pull out our inner potential and serve the world and all that kind of stuff. And I totally believe the same thing. I mean, I've been working with an agency, like a brand strategy company, for a few years now, because I see the power in using my story and my struggle to help people who are just a step or two behind me.
That's right.
And one of the things that Rory Vaden says is that we're most qualified to serve the person we once were. Mm-hmm. And when I was listening to Ed Milet, he put it was the same exact thing, the same exact concept, but he told the story of his father. Mm-hmm. And his father was alcoholic for many years and was able to really overcome that and become a different person later in life, like really sort of changed his circumstances. Mm-hmm. And he said, he shares a story about how he was asleep, several nights ago, and he woke up in the middle of the night, just drenched in sweat, crying. And his wife was like, "What's the matter?" And he goes, "I just had this realization that someone helped my dad become better." Mm-hmm. And he goes on to talk about how, like, the person who helped his dad was an alcoholic, like someone who had been an alcoholic. And sometimes we can say to ourselves, like, well, I'm not credible, or I'm not an expert, or I'm not this or that. But in reality, you just have to have been there to be able to help somebody. So it's kind of a little bit of a side tangent, but when you were talking about really helping people find their inner potential, and that, to me, I had to speak into that, because I think that's so huge. Because as we start to become aware of ourselves and aware of not just our skill sets, but our journey, like what have we overcome? Then we can not only change ourselves, but it impacts the people around us too.
Yeah. So many people, when, let's say, they want to get into business of some kind, or maybe they want to get into coaching of some kind or whatever, well, who am I? Right? Who am I to help other people? And we have to remember, to your point, there's always going to be people that are ahead of you in the journey. And there's always people going to be that were where you were and maybe not quite as far along on the journey. So at every level that you're at, who are you? I mean, you're the perfect person to help the kind of people, like Rory says, that you were 2-3 years ago. You're the perfect person for that. The perfect person. And that helped me when I still run my financial agency. And then as I got into speaking and coaching and all of that, it helped me, because I had been decently successful in our financial business, but I still struggle with those thoughts. We all do. Anytime you make a change, these fears. Who am I? Who's going to want to listen? Who's going to want to buy from me? Who's going to all that? Well, there's lots of people that will. There's lots of people, because again, you can help people where you were 2-3 years ago perfectly, in a perfect way. And then as you keep growing and getting better, guess what? Now you can serve on a higher level, and you can help people on an even higher level.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, everybody, I find that everybody that sort of embraces this idea of wanting to become better and becoming obsessed with growth, tends to have their own sort of unique routines or unique, habits, I guess is the best way to put it. I'd love to hear, what do you do on a daily basis? Are you like a morning person and you do the whole gratitude journaling thing? How do you set up your day? Like what are the things that you're doing with intention to sort of take on this life the way you are?
Yeah. The biggest thing for me, it's evolved lots over the years. I've been a morning person for a long time. I wasn't. And then probably a year into getting into business, I realized that, a lot of the people that I looked up to were. So I thought, okay, well, maybe that makes sense to do that then. So for me, it's evolved a lot, but I always come back to the four most important things, and three have been with me longer than the fourth. But the most important things to me in terms of how am I setting up my day, how am I setting up my mind, how am I getting on the frequency of what I want, are a combination of meditation, reading and studying some kind of book, and then journaling. So these are the big three. And then the other part that's become significant in my life is, and it's not always necessarily first thing in the morning, but some kind of physical activity. So to me, those are the ones. And meditation, if I could only pick one for the rest of my life, I would pick meditation because it gives me so much guidance, clarity, strength to be able to move forward in all the other areas of my life. I mean, meditation changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 That reminds me a lot of everything you just said. Reminds me of the Miracle Morning Habits.
Yeah.
Hal Elrod, his book, which I remember when I read it the first time, I was like, this is such a no, kind of like the what is it, the 5-second rule by Mel Robbins. Like it's such a simple practice, but can make a huge impact. I've been following the Miracle Morning routine for a really long time, but I don't do it in the morning because I'm not a morning person. So I'm the person who's like way more productive at like 10 p.m. But it doesn't matter when you do it, right? It's it matters that you do it.
That's right.
So if you're listening to this, I'll make sure that I link up in the show notes for everybody, all these different books that we've mentioned, because we've mentioned a lot, all these different resources. But yeah, meditation, reading, journaling, and exercise. And that brings me back to something I wanted to mention earlier. And I'm glad you said it because it made me remember, is this idea of journaling. Because I really do believe that if we all journaled, we would just become so much more aware of our own thoughts. So
it's a great tool.
I mean, it's like, you want to know what your tendencies are or the way that you talk to yourself, like write a journal entry and then go back and read it a few days later and you'll start to pick up on patterns, I'm reading this book series to my kindergartner. It's the Junie B. Jones, very basic age 6 chapter books. And in those chapter books, most of the chapters start with a journal entry by Junie B. And you can kind of see, obviously it's part of her character development, but you can see what her nuances are and her, the way she thinks, and it's made to be funny, but that same thing goes for us too, as adults. And one thing that I started doing probably about 10 years ago is it started off with just gratitude journaling. And so it was just more of like a quick habit, like every night before I went to bed, I would open up the journal on my nightstand and I would just write 3 things that happened today. Or people that I met or whatever that had an impact on me that I'm grateful for. And so it started really simple, which is so cool how the brain really does shift into thinking more positively and seeing more gratitude in life when you do that. But then my grandmother actually, she passed away probably 8-9 years ago, but she had told me, she was like, Jenny, if you don't learn anything else from me, she's like, keep a journal about your children. She's like, keep a journal about your travels, all this stuff. So we actually just, as we're talking right now, we just came back from a 10-day trip to Florida for spring break.
Nice.
And for the first time, I've taken my grandma's advice and I sat down and wrote, what we did and all the little details, like the lizard catching and all, the sunburns and all the little things. And it's so funny how, like, when you can look at life through that lens and you can look at it through like seeing the details and paying attention and gratitude, like how much your own mind shifts. But I have to also assume that just the principle and the act of journaling can bring about so much awareness for people. I have a health coach that I'm thinking of on my team that has participated in a lot of mastermind groups that my life coach leads for my team. And it probably took 2 or 3 different books and 2 or 3 different masterminds, weeks upon weeks of Zoom calls for her to finally realizing what that programming was in her own brain. Like for her to actually become aware was a process.
For sure.
I mean, it is not just like all of a sudden you're going to realize, oh, this is the way I talk to myself. Like it is a process.
Yeah.
I remember her having such an emotional moment when she finally realized, like, oh, like this is what's holding me back from so much. This is what's holding me back from sort of that next level.
Mm-hmm.
As we sort of wrap things up, I'd love to hear from you. You work with people.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about this type of stuff all day long.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the programming in your mind, but aside
Mm-hmm.
from that, like, what do you feel really holds most people back from living up to their fullest potential, and what can
Mm-hmm.
they do about it?
I mean, we kind of talked about, but I think the biggest thing holding most people back is the addiction to the story of their past and present. I think that's the biggest thing, because, if we really believe, and people that are listening, I mean, they've been listening to this kind of stuff, I assume, multiple times throughout your podcast. So if you really believe to some degree that your thoughts have an impact on your life, if you really believe that, even if it's a tiny little bit, then it makes sense that if we started to focus on and tell a story of how we want our life to be, who we want to be, how we want to live, and we stop repeating the story of the past and the present, then our life could start to change. So hands down, the program, when it is a program, and it's a very deeply rooted program, to look at what is or what has been. So we look at our life, we look at our bank balance, we look at our body in the mirror, we look at the scale, we look at whatever, the commissions or the revenue in your business or whatever it is, and we allow that to determine how we think and feel. And then because we allow that to determine how we think and feel, the byproduct is we act in a way in accordance with that. So the number one thing holding people back is this addiction to looking at somehow my present reality or my past reality is indicative of where I'm going in the future. But where you are and where you've been has zero impact on where you're going unless you keep repeating the story of what is, unless you keep focusing on how it's this way. Because then if you keep doing that, then you continue to perpetuate it. And this is how most people end up their whole lives never really getting what they want, because they're not focused on that. They're focused on how they don't have. They're focused on lack. They're focused on my team's not growing enough. My business isn't enough. This, and they're so conditioned to look at lack, to look at what is, to look at what's missing in their lives and what they don't have, or the little they do have, that they keep staying stuck. They keep staying stuck. So if you want to know the simplest answer, it's not easy, but it is simple. The simplest answer to, okay, if that's what's keeping me stuck, then I've got to learn to redirect my focus. Got to learn to look at the good in my life. Got to learn to look at what is working. Got to learn to look at what I want. The combination of the things that I love in my life, the things that I can appreciate, the things that are working, and the focus on where I want to be, who I'd like to become, what I'd like to do. Man, these things working together, they elevate your state so much. They put you on a whole new frequency. They raise your vibration. They change your energy. And when you change your energy, you truly do change your life. Mm-hmm. So that, hands down, that's what's keeping people stuck. The addiction and program and habit, which is all changeable, by the way, but to looking at present circumstances, present results, and past circumstances and past results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I've mentioned this on previous episodes, but that, the humans are conditioned to stay safe. We're conditioned to like fear the unknown, right? Like,
for sure.
And so we talked about this. I did a recent episode on the power of mastermind groups and surrounding yourself with positive people. And it's something that I believe in profoundly, because I feel like people need more influence in the right direction. And we get enough of the negativity, right? We get enough of even just our moms or dads or neighbors telling us like, who are you to think you can do that? Right. And so we need to put ourselves in an environment where we're around people who influence risk, who influence positivity and better mindset. I totally believe that. I just think that sometimes we have to just recognize about ourselves that our brain is trying to keep us safe. And if we really want the next level, we have to break through that to a point of course, we want to stay safe in the sense of staying safe, but like we want to break through that in a way that allows us to really get out of our comfort zone to be a better parent or to be a better wife or to be a better XY, fill in the blank. Right. So, anyway, I want to ask you, what are we've mentioned, I'm looking at your bookshelf. I mean, we've mentioned all the things that you're into, like, what are you really digging right now as far as reading? You mentioned that's part of your daily practice, or if you have podcasts that you're listening to, like, give us maybe your top 3 or 4 resources.
Sure. Yeah, my favorite, the stuff I'm currently reading the most right now is it's called Money and the Law of Attraction by Esther and Jerry Hicks. Yeah, have you ever read any of their stuff?
I have not, no.
Oh man, so it's a little out there to begin with. So just to prepare everybody, if you can get past the first little introduction, Esther Hicks is a channel for this consciousness. So it's a little out there, but then once you get into the content, if that's not up your alley, that's okay. When I first started reading these books a long time ago, probably a decade ago, it was really weird for me. But the content was so freaking good. So I've, been studying that stuff for years. But that's what I'm currently reading most right now.
Okay.
I had this habit of my life, early in my life, that I was a voracious reader, and I would read, probably 40, 50, 60 books a year, but I was just consuming more and more information. And I'd finish one book and I'm already on to the next one. And that idea of application, but really understanding too. So now in my life, I kind of cycle between now. I still probably read the same amount, but I really only read maybe 10, 12 books.
Yeah.
And I'll go between them. And I'll go back to them and I'm reading it again and I'm reading it again. So I'm not sure how many times I read this book. I read it a lot of times, so that'd be one. I love Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. One of my all-time favorites I go back to all the time. There's a great classic from the mid 1900s called Your Invisible Power. It's all about visualization. It's a short book, but read that one lots.
Yeah.
Those would be three that I love for sure. I'm more a reader than I am audio, but I like audio. I like Ed's stuff. Ed's great. Yeah, he's a great guy. And Brennan's stuff. I like marketing stuff. I'm into marketing as well. So, studying a lot of that right now in terms of different courses I'm taking and everything as well too. So
yeah. I'm very similar to you in the fact that probably in my 20s, I was listening to, at least a podcast a day, if not more. Mm-hmm. I was reading all the books. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like I had a shallow sense of awareness. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until I started working with like a life coach or I started doing mastermind groups where I really could hold myself accountable to what I was learning. And so I'm like you, my goal this year was not quantity, it was quality. And so, really looking at one book a month.
Nice.
And when I end each chapter, like what is something that I can apply to my life that I've learned in that chapter, and then really just almost not moving forward until I do it, really holding myself to it. So that's totally get where you're coming from. Okay. Well, I would love for you to point people in the direction of where they can find you, all your things, in case this is intriguing to them. Sure. And I also just want to take a moment to say thank you for taking the time, for adding value to my listeners today, and for nerding out with me on all these different personal growth things. So direct people to where they can find you for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate the time. It's great to be together. They're my favorite conversations. So I've loved having it. My website, you can find me there, benspangl.com. Spangl is SPANGL. So there's no E on it. That won't take you there. Okay. Social platforms, the best ones for me are Instagram, just at Ben Spangl. And then I got a business Facebook page that I use as well. So you can find me there too. Those would be the best social. I'm on some of the other ones, but I'm most active on Instagram.
Awesome.
And Facebook there. And actually for your listeners, for anyone that wants, so I have a 7-day meditation challenge. I'm huge on meditation for creating the life that you want. And so if you've never gotten into it, it's a great challenge. It's normally $97 is what I charge for it. But I have a special link when I come on podcast to give people that. So if anyone's interested in that, it's $7 instead. And it's benspangl.com/meditate. So you can't find it on the site, but if you go to that specific one, it'll bring you there.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, as always, I'll link everything up in the show notes so that everybody can just simply swipe up and click the button instead of having to type it out themselves. But thank you again so much for being here, for sharing your light with my community. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
It's my pleasure. Great being with you. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, take care.